if we want to mobilize the humeral ulnar joint to increase either flexion or extension, everybody should hopefully is familiar with this one, right? This is the one where she just relaxes her arm on mine. I come in like this and I do a little scoop, right? To do that mobilization. So that's one. Now we've also got our, and that's specifically for the, like I said, the humerus and the ulna. Now we've also have an articulation between the radius and the humerus as well, right? So this one's a little trickier in that first I got to be able to find the radius, okay, know where that radial head is, and then at that joint or that articulation between the radius and the humerus, which portion is concave and what's convex?
The radial head is convex.
Concave. Okay, radial head is concave.
I was thinking radial
Right?
ulnar.
That guy right there is going to be concave. Now, yes, you're correct though. Between the radius and the ulna, the radius at the proximal end is going to be the convex portion. But between the humerus and the radius, it's concave. Okay? So if we want to increase the motion of flexion between that or at that joint, which direction do I need to mobilize the radius? Anteriorly, right? Cave, right? As we go into flexion, it's going to glide in the same direction as this
cave,
one,
same
Right.
thing.
So while they're working through that,
Same as in
we're going to go through okay?
anatomical
With
position.
this one, I find that radius, which we've got a lot of musculature for those extensors right there, right? And to support the ulna just for kicks and giggles, really, for my own sake, and so that I can have a counter force. Okay?
That was something else besides.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess it's a little more than just kicks and giggles. So if I find that joint and I just squeeze down a little bit, I should just, that in and of itself should give me just a little bit of distraction. Okay? So I find it, I give a little squeeze, I've got my distraction, and then keeping my arms like this, I'm just gonna do a little serratus anterior workout. Okay? Depending on if I'm doing anterior or posterior and how I wanna work it. And if I do an anterior glide, I'm just using my fingers right on that radial head and pulling her anteriorly. Or to do a posterior glide, now I'm using my palm, taking up a lot of slack, and then applying that posterior glide while I support the ulna.
What are some pathologies that you would do for radial ulnar?
Okay, so if we want to increase, or if we're mobilizing between the radius and the ulna, what motions occur between those two bones? Supination, pronation, right? So this one is specifically doing that anterior glide. We're working not only on flexion, but what else do you think we're working on? If we're doing anterior glide of the radius, we're going to be flexion, but we're also working on which one? Because we're convex on that radius, right? And so if the radius is, we go into supination, it's rolling posteriorly, we've got to anterior glide for supination. And if we want to increase pronation, then we're going to do posterior glide. Okay? So for supination at the proximal radial ulnar joint, we're going to do an anterior glide. For pronation at the proximal radial ulnar joint, we're going to do a posterior glide. Okay? Anterior glide is going to look exactly the same as what we just did to increase the motion of flexion at the humeral radial joint. Okay? So again, we just come in like this. We give that anterior glide, and we're working not only flexion between the humerus and the radius, but also supination between the radius and the ulna at the proximal joint. Okay, makes sense.
And then it flips when you go to distal, though, right? It's the opposite.
It does. It does. It flips. So, if I'm gonna now try and increase the motion of supination or pronation at the distal radial ulnar joint, it changes, right? Because now the relationship, as far as the joint surfaces, has changed. So the radius at the distal end is going to be concave, and the ulna is convex, right? And with both the proximal and the distal radial ulnar joint, it's going to be just easiest to mobilize the radius. So we'll always identify what surface the radius is. Okay? And then for that one, I can do it either coming from anterior, like this, or I can come on this direction. I'll do this just for the sake of our video. I'm going to stabilize the ulna, come in here, and again, I just give a little squeeze, and I'm going to get some distraction at that joint. And I do an anterior or a palmar glide. That's going to increase the motion of pronation. And then if I get my distraction, I do a dorsal glide. I'm going to increase supination. Okay, good. And then I guess while we're here, we'll address wrist flexion and extension, as well as ulnar and radial deviation. If I want to increase the motion of wrist extension, what type of glide do I need to do? Palmar or dorsal? Palmar, right? Because my carpals are convex. Okay, so as she goes into extension, they're going to roll. Excuse me, they're going to roll dorsally. It's hard from this direction. They're going to roll dorsally, and they've got to glide palmally.
So would that be ventral?
For
Oh wait,
yeah.
no, I'm looking wrong. Oh yeah, okay.
Okay. For this one, if they can handle being in supination, I can do it in standing. If they can't, I can stay, just keep them in neutral position like this. And then I'm gonna do just like I did at the ankle. I've got my top hand around her, I almost call it malleoli. Styloid process. Geez, my brain is not working today. And then I drop in, get that distraction. I'm gonna do palmar glide to increase wrist extension, and then a dorsal glide to increase wrist flexion. Okay. And then for radial and ulnar deviation, again, which part is concave and which one's convex? Carpals are what?
What?
Carpals are what?
I don't.
I saw the blue moving. Carpals are convex, okay? So for both wrist flexion and extension, and radial ulnar deviation, the carpals are the convex portion, okay? So if I want to increase her motion of radial deviation, which direction do I need to mobilize? Radially or ulnarly? Jeez. Having a hard time.
You're going radial.
Yeah, so if I want to increase radial deviation, I'm going to mobilize to the ulnar side. Okay? So again, I come in like this, I get my distraction, and I do an ulnar glide to increase radial deviation. I do a radial glide to increase ulnar deviation. Everybody good on those? I kind of flew through them all. That was more than I was anticipating, but it just kind of, you guys made it naturally flow. We just kept going.